Hello, this is part 3 of my interview with cult specialist Rachel Bernstein. If you haven't yet seen parts 1 and 2, I highly recommend you do so to give you the necessary background for what we talk about here. In this final segment, we get a bit more personal with Rachel and her direct experiences with Scientology. Shortly after Rachel started working as a counselor in the early 1990s, she had a run-in with Scientology's dark side. I've talked extensively in other videos on my channel about Scientology's practice of labeling people as fair game, meaning that Scientologists are free to do anything to that person. The idea is to ruin them utterly, by whatever means, legal or illegal. This term is generally reserved for ex-Scientologists who've been thought to cross the church in some way. As punishment, their lives are made miserable by Scientology and its hired goons. This is well documented and is a practice which continues to this day, with Scientology even having the nerve to defend their stalking and harassment of critics as a First Amendment protected religious practice. However, it is not just ex-Scientologists who incur the wrath of Scientology's goon squads. A writer named Paulette Cooper was driven to a nearly suicidal state by Scientology's fair game practices in the 70s and 80s. There have been many others before and since who were made bankrupt, lost their families, businesses, and even worse. Rachel, for doing nothing more than her job by trying to help someone who came to her for counseling, was relentlessly fair-gamed. She talks about that experience in this video, and we then go over more about the destructive cult mindset that allows people to think that such behavior is justified. So without further ado, here is Rachel. I would like you to please relate your experience with Scientology, because you ran into them really early on in your counseling, and it was a fascinating and kind of freaky, scary story. What happened?
Okay, right. You know, I didn't know that groups like this, especially groups that call themselves churches, could behave this way. But I was a youngin'. I had just.
When was this actually? Not to put a age on you or anything.
No, I don't mind. I just turned 50. I'm very proud. I was, let's see, I'd just been licensed. So this was 1992, 93. This was about a year after I was licensed. Someone came to my office, a woman who was in Scientology, and she was very scared and said that she needed some help and that no one knew she was there. And she kept looking around my office to see if I had cameras, because I noticed her eyes were darting everywhere, and she was very jumpy too. Any noise that she heard, anyone opening and closing a door down the hallway, she was jumping. And I thought, wow, she's behaving to me like someone who's escaping some sort of abusive relationship. She feels that she's in some sort of danger. And I said, tell me about why you're here. And she said, I belong to a church, I think. And I said, okay, tell me more about that. And she said, I'm not supposed to be here, and I'm not supposed to come to see a therapist. And are you going to put electrodes on my brain? That's what she asked me. Well, that was the first time I'd ever been asked that question. And I'm sure that most of the people in my field who do counseling have never been asked that question. But that was something she had been told was going to happen to her if she sought out counseling. And she said that she is in a group and she's being kept from coming home and visiting her family. She actually showed me that she had lost a lot of weight. She was working nonstop. She showed me a picture of herself just a year before where she had kind of rosy cheeks and seemed fine, and now she looked kind of ghost-like. And I offered her my support, and I'm here, and if you want to talk, and you don't have to feel scared of talking to me, and I'm here if you want to come again. Well, when she went back and had to report what she had done that day to her handlers in Scientology, she felt like they kept asking her. There was sort of this missing hour in her day where they didn't know where she was. And she was under so much pressure to say, they weren't believing what she was telling them. And finally she said, okay, I went to go see this therapist, Rachel Bernstein. Well, then about a week later, had someone come in to see me, a man, who was asking me very leading questions. If I felt someone was in a group, if they were over 18, would I kidnap them? I mean, in retrospect, I know why he was asking me all these questions, to see if he could catch me doing something potentially illegal, and if I was doing deprogrammings and holding people against their will, etc. It was an odd, tense session, but he left afterwards, and then a few days later, I got a full transcript of that session. So he had been recording it, and I didn't know he was recording it. And it had a handwritten note at the top that said, just to let you know, we're watching and listening. And it was unbelievable, because I felt like I had just been hit by a car. Had that sort of sudden burst of, like, my nerves were on end. And then that was it. That began sort of the cascade of getting a letter from the board that oversees my license saying a formal complaint had been lodged against me and my license, that I was abusive, and that I was holding people against their will, and that I had done a whole host of things. I didn't know what they were, had to look up what they meant. And then there were two people who dressed up like members of the janitorial crew and got into my office and got into my files, and were calling clients saying that I was a whole variety of things, bad things. And this was all an orchestrated Scientology effort to discredit me, and also, I think, just to intimidate me, to have me stop doing what I was doing. The thing is, I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting in my office listening to people talk about the pain that was being caused by Scientology to them, but I wasn't doing anything. But because I was a potential resource, and it might cause someone to think that they could leave and have somebody to talk to, I was a threat to Scientology. And then I had some thugs, these two private eyes, Scientology private eyes, who started following me around and would be right outside the door of the clinic where I worked and would follow me to my car. They tried to get my home address. They called all, and they tried to find lots of creative ways to try to get my personal information from the office staff. Wound up knowing where I lived at the time and parked a car with darkened windows out in front of my house. And it went on for quite some time. And I thought to myself, what the hell? What did I do? I can't even think about what I said to some woman who seemed panicked, I'm here if you want to talk. Was it? But they went after me, and I had to use my savings to hire an attorney. I mean, I had very little savings at the time. I was just starting out. And I had to clear my name. And after my name was cleared, I spoke to someone at the board who said, this is what they do. And we couldn't tell you at the time because we had to follow protocol and go and have you really, fill out affidavits and show that you hadn't done any of these things. And then, you know, our hands were tied at the time that you were under investigation. But now that you've been cleared, let me just say, almost everyone who does the work that you do has gone through this and then some by Scientology.
Wow. So they actually were aware of the fact that this kind of harassment and stalking was going on a routine basis.
Yeah, they were absolutely aware of it and were following their job by not telling me at the time. And I thought, okay, now I have to make a choice. Do I want to deal with this? Is this what I signed up for? I mean,
Right.
I just want to help people, you know, and what is this? And can it get worse? And can they get really physically dangerous towards me? And there was something that happened where I decided in my mind to see them as what they were at the time and still are to a great degree with certain people, but I saw them as bullies. And
that's right. That's exactly what they are.
And so I was raised in a family where you learn you don't let the bullies win. That's how they get away with it, and that's how the victims keep getting victimized. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to dig my heels in, which is the opposite what they are hoping for me to do, because they're hoping I'm going to run for the hills, how do I do this safely? So I really did it in a way where I stayed under their radar as much as possible. And I didn't put together a website for myself until recently. And I didn't, you know, I mean, I did media, but I never said Scientology's name, and I never used the word cult in association with Scientology, even if I was directly asked. I was very cautious and just didn't want to deal with it, especially when I had young children. I wanted to have them be free from all of this kind of crazy stuff. But I know now that these private eyes are really bad guys, and I am lucky to be alive. I'm lucky that nothing horrible happened.
Yeah, they very much engage in a lot of saber rattling and a lot of legal threats. And back then, especially in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, they were really in their heyday. As we've, you know, you and I have spoken about off camera, was, you know, that was a time when Scientology went after and acquired Cult Awareness Network, right, which was an actual activist advocate group that was trying to blow the whistle on cults, and Scientology it was a thorn in their side, and they didn't like it, and they trumped up a legal case against the cult, or they got hold of a legal case that was occurring and put the Scientology lawyers, Kendrick Moxon, on it, and won that case and bankrupted the Cult Awareness Network as a result of that. Didn't really care at all about the kid who, you know, whose case he actually managed. That's covered in another video I actually did with a woman who was involved in that case.
Okay.
And yeah, that was something else to learn about. But that same time period is the time period they were harassing you and hiring a couple private investigators and having them intimidate and harass somebody to get them to shut up is SOP for its standard operating procedure for Scientology. It's what they do. And to this day they still do it. They just don't have the means, or sorry, they do have the means. They don't have the ability to do it as easily because of the internet and the exposure that they get when they do that kind of crap, because it's a whole different world than it was 25 years ago.
Right.
So,
exactly right. It is a whole different world. I mean, they're having a PR nightmare, which is wonderful. I mean, if it keeps them
they
from...
only have themselves to blame.
Right, exactly. If they didn't pull this stuff, if Scientology had been able to, and if it could still exist and say, listen, we think we have the best things since sliced bread. Sign up for it if you want. Don't if you don't want. We're good either way. We're here. And if you speak out against us, you know, we're sorry, and that's your opinion. That would have been fine. But no, it was that when they felt that anyone could be a threat, or when there was the perception of a potential threat, they went after you with such ferocity. It's like tripping someone by accident and then having them turn around and punch you in the face. That's how it always felt.
Right.
And that's
not only punching you in the face, but then going and slashing your tires, finding every friend you've ever had and telling them what a horrible person you are, and then threatening to burn down your house if you tell anybody.
Yeah, right. Exactly right. And then, do you want to deal with them in court? No, their attorneys are horrible. So you don't want to deal with even more bullying. It's like inviting any kind of bullying, because, looking at it psychologically, what they're letting you know when they have this reaction to you that is so disproportionate, they're letting you know that they don't have the capacity to be able to handle any kind of criticism. It's sort of like the group en masse has an adult tantrum, but over and over and over again. And that's also part of the regressive nature that takes place, I think, within these cults, because you get to be a bully, you get to have tantrums, and somehow get away with it just because people don't want to have to deal with you.
Well, very much so. And in Scientology's case, I can't speak for other destructive cults and how they overreact or exaggerate when they're, dealing with criticism. But it's probably psychologically similar in terms of a reflection of the cult leader's own personality. I can speak with some degree of authority in regards to Scientology by saying that Hubbard, it's a direct reflection of Hubbard's own personality and his own flaws, his own character flaws. He personally could not deal with criticism as a writer, as a husband, as a human being. He was a vindictive, vengeful person, and he wrote in the policies of the church to always remember any slight and never fail to settle the score. Right? That's how he put it. And when it comes to critics or people who are antagonistic to the church, the exact words he used were "ruin them utterly." And he wasn't being figurative. That wasn't some kind of a simile or something. He meant exactly, precisely what he said. Yeah. And he recommended from the 1950s, as early as 1955, that these were the tactics that the church was supposed to enact in order to deal with criticism or critics.
Right.
And so it's literally written into the DNA of Scientology to be this way. The individual Scientologists have no choice in the matter. If they're going to be good Scientologists, this is what they're supposed to be doing. And so they find people of low repute, like these private investigators, who will do anything for money, or lawyers who will represent the church. These are people who I have nothing but contempt for because they have no moral compass. They will do anything for money. And that's, I don't agree with that principle, And they might use lofty language like, well, everybody deserves a good defense or whatever. That's just justification. They're morally corrupt people. So those are the kind of people they find to carry out their dirty work. But the people in the church truly believe that they're doing this because it's the good thing to do. Because Hubbard said to do it, and nothing Hubbard said can be wrong. And they don't ever connect the dots that Hubbard was a vindictive, vengeful, awful human being. Yeah. They don't think of him that way, so they don't ever connect those dots. Just a commentary on Scientology. But
no, I think it's very important.
Of the group.
I think
you have to experience that.
Right, and I'm glad that that you're able to formulate it that way. I think it's so powerful to learn about the fair game policy. It's so important to understand also that it is all in a way for L. Ron Hubbard to quiet any kind of critics, to intimidate people from questioning him again because his ego can't take it or couldn't take it. But instead of saying like, oh, I can't do, he just went after you and had the group go after you in what was anything but fair game. There's nothing fair about it. But here's also the interesting use of language, to go back to, when we talked at a previous time about language.
Yeah.
When you are seen as really that you have done something that warrants an attack on you, you are seen as someone who has attacked Scientology. But you've not done it. You've either told someone that they can come and see you, and that's okay if they want to talk about their experiences. You've given them a chance to have kind of a healing moment, or you're talking about your own experiences there that are bad. You have the right to do that. You have the freedom to do that, and that's your experience. I can talk about that, what some of my clients have shared with me that they want people to know about. And not that I could ever let you know their names, but they've signed off on saying, I want the world to know. So can you please let people know? This is what happens when you're involved in this group. And so instead of you being seen as someone who's the victim, you're the perpetrator, you're the attacker, you're the one who is attacking the group. But no, you're not on the offense. You're on the defense. They're on the offense. They're really attacking you.
Precisely. And they're even, and it does become a matter of language, because they couch the terms as church attackers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Plurals. They come up with these names to demean and debase people who really are at their wits' end as to what else to do.
I remember one time speaking at a conference years ago. It was actually at a CAN conference before it was taken over by Scientology. And CAN started, it was like a mom and pop organization with parents who were concerned about their kids who had gotten involved in cults, and it started around a kitchen table. It was hardly this nefarious group that Scientology made it out to be. But I remember walking in with some people who I knew had just left a cult and were really very fragile, but they wanted to talk about their experience if they could, and if not, just get support for being there. And they walked in, and there were a number of Scientologists who got into all of our faces and yelling at us, what crimes have you committed? What crimes are you guilty of? And that was...
They came to a meeting and did this.
Yeah, oh, yeah. And they used to stand outside the hotels, even in the hallways at these CAN conferences. And then when we started going to these AFF conferences, that was the American Family Foundation, that was sort of the new CAN, and was helping families and people get, support and get their loved ones out if they could. They were there too, and they would heckle, and they would be in the crowd and screaming at the people who were talking, who were crying about having lost their children. They were brutal. And police were called, but they would bring, I remember this now, wow, it's all coming back to me. They would bring video cameras and regular cameras and start taking pictures of you, and not explain why they were taking pictures of you, but just to intimidate you. And now we're going to post your picture. And here I'm walking in with these people who are injured people, and they're getting attacked by Scientologists. It was horrible. It happened over and over and over again. And they'd be out picketing out in front of these hotels where we were having these conferences, and passing out their pamphlets, and really doing it as a way to just do PR for themselves. Any opportunity to do PR.
Right, exactly. And I don't think people realize how horrible Scientologists can be, just on a face-to-face level. At least I don't think they realized it generally, certainly not back then. I think thank the internet, because now that kind of activity doesn't happen, because people can just pull out their cell phones and start filming them. And and that has been done, in fact, and Scientology is now widely known to be that that those people are that horrible.
Yeah. There are other groups that are horrible too, that I've dealt with, not to the same degree, but I know I've dealt with former members who were scared out of their minds, who have gotten involved in Bible-based groups or yoga cults, or with psychics, gypsy psychics, with a guy who's now in prison, who's still running his group from prison. I mean, they're worried about being followed. They're worried about having their phones tapped. They're worried about sharing any of their information with other people in the group, because they know it's going to go back to the leaders, and nobody is safe to talk to. When I run support groups in my office, sometimes I have a general support group for people from a variety of different cults, but other times, when there's really been something that's happened within a particular cult, I'll have a whole group of people just from that group who really need to meet and come in, 20 or 30 at a time, just for that particular group. And they check to make sure they're not being followed. They're constantly checking their phones to make sure that it's not on, that no one's recording anything. They're nervous. And so, yeah, Scientology is really capitalized on people being nervous when they're going after them, but they didn't invent this idea. Certainly, it happens in a lot of other groups too.
Good, again, very good point. Just when I sit here and say, as a former Scientologist, how horrible Scientologists can be, I have to always, kind of look in the mirror a little bit. And one thing I'm happy to say is that I never, ever did any of that kind of activity that we're talking about right now, and I never would have, because it was just too, even I as bad as my belief might have been, and silly and goofy as they might have gotten, I would never have been so hostile or antagonistic to people as that. It's just not my nature to do that. I just could never do it, no matter what my cult leader said to do. So it does also, require a certain kind of human being to be that way toward other human beings too.
Yes, it does. And I think then what it does is it causes those parts of that person's human nature to feel free to just roam around the cabin as they would like, right? That if people are prone to being antagonistic or angry or highly reactive, they want them in people's faces, right? That's where being reactive is actually, right, a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And lauded. But also some people do it to jockey for position. They are worried that they've been pushed down to a lower position, and they want to get up higher, and they want to be in the running for some sort of leadership position. And this is the way that they do it. And they prove their allegiance by being cruel to people in a public way.
Yeah, that certainly fits in with the Scientology mold. Very, very class conscience, right? Very conscious, very, very status happy Scientologists are. Routinely, uniformly, even back then, even me too, right? Very much into your standing as a Scientologist, and always trying to get like you mentioned, jockeying for a higher position. And that's because it was so easy in Scientology to get in trouble, and you wanted some credits, you wanted some laurels to fall back on, when those trouble spots happened, because they were inevitably going to happen to everybody. And you're not going to come through Scientology and never be, in trouble. You're always, they're always going to get you on something, and you're going to be in the doghouse, and you're going to have to make reparations and make amends and pay a lot of money to do that, or a lot of your time and that sort of thing. I can't imagine that it isn't that way in other cults too.
It's exactly that way. What you also find, though, is that the leaders are not the ones doing the public intimidation. They're not the ones out on the street yelling at people. They're not the ones who are going to be getting into trouble. They're not the ones also who are going to get arrested.
Oh no, it's all about plausible deniability with them. I didn't know they were doing that. What? That's just so not in alignment with our principles and guidelines. We would never, ever do such a thing.
Right.
And that's, and when the whole, I mean, the ultimate example of that in Scientology was when they got caught, in the 1970s, infiltrating the U.S. government.
Right.
I mean, it was all about, they've done a whole historical revisionism on that whole time period. It was just these bad apples, and they were the ones who did it, and we cleaned house and got rid of all those guys. Every one of those guys is still in Scientology and still doing, and is still totally fine with the church, because they were, they were actually doing the Lord's work, so to speak.
Right.
But they tell the IRS, they tell the public at large, oh, we got rid of those bad apples, they don't exist anymore. And yet you come forward to the early 90s, and there they are stalking and harassing you.
Right, exactly. And so I think also when you're involved in that, and you're out there picketing and intimidating and doing what you think is for some sort of cause, or for your own cause to raise yourself up or raise your stats up, right? You forget that really what you're doing is you're doing the bidding of somebody else. You're somebody's minion, basically.
There's other words we could use for that, yeah.
Right, exactly. To keep this PG, we should.
Good.
Okay. Right. There are been a lot of words I wanted to say over the years.
Yes.
I worked with someone who had gotten involved with a psychic, and was being used by them. And the psychic, what she called herself, the Gypsy Mom, and the Gypsy Mom had the person who was her follower, who ended up being my client, open up new lines of credit and purchase things for the Gypsy Mom and her family, and put everything in the follower's name and sign everything using her signature. So there was no paper trail that went back to this family of psychics that were actually, it was a whole family network where they had different shops, and are still in business today. And the police can't get them on anything because there's no law to get them on, because mind control is something that you can't necessarily disprove. It's like this invisible art and science. And this poor person, the victim, is the one who winds up in jail because of credit card fraud. And that happens sort of time and time again, that the people who are pushed to do the things like do the things that are illegal, do the things that are intimidating, do the things that cause them to have a paper trail, are the ones who end up getting into trouble. And the cult leaders then go on to just find other victims, and then have this air of entitlement because they've gotten away with it and they found a way to get away with it. And each time they get away with it, it creates more and more of that entitlement, sort of more and more of a monster.
Precisely. And I really wish that those who did those sort of tactics and carried out that kind of evil behavior could be smart enough somehow, or rational enough. And of course it's impossible given the nature of what they're doing, but if you could only wish that they could see what a tool they're being. And literally, I mean, they are being a tool. They're being guided and controlled by somebody else who does not care one bit about them, and will discard them in a microsecond if they become any kind of threat or problem for the cult leader or for the cult itself. And I've literally heard people in this passionate fury, in the heat of the moment, say, I've heard Scientologists actually say the words, let me be a martyr, I'll go take that guy out,
they want a martyr, I'll give them a martyr. You know, they get this frenzy, and it's so irrational. You know, there's so many other words, but you know, irrational will do. You know, that they get into this passionate daze, and if they could just see what a waste they really are. You know?
Right. Yeah, I think that
they're the filter. You know, they're the point that's going to get in trouble. They're the ones the cop's going to arrest. And Scavenge and Hubbard, they're untouched. You know. Right.
They're untouched, and there's nothing they put in writing that says that they told those people to do that.
That's right.
There is this whole sort of food chain, right? And so information gets sent down the pike, but it doesn't ever get traced back to them, or at least not very much. And I think that they know that. You know, that people also, when you were saying they're in this frenzy, when I've talked to people who have left cults, they actually talk about having a hard time kind of staying calm and being calm, because they've been operating at this kind of level of intensity that's been so great, like they've been on a high for however long they were in it, and they're not quite sure how to just be and how to relax, how to fall asleep. It's shifted them physiologically, and not necessarily forever, but certainly for a long stretch of time after they get out, because you're charged up and you have to not waste a second, and you have this ultimate goal, and you also have to watch your back, because people are noticing how quickly you're doing something and how much you're getting done that day, and so you can't quite just sit back and relax, put your feet up. There's no opportunity to do that.
So true. I've written about that because it was such a problem for me, and I've certainly heard about it with others, especially coming out of the Sea organization, more so than your regular routine Scientologist, a public Scientologist. When you're a staff member, and then especially at that upper level as a Sea Org member, it's 24/7, and it's every moment of your life is 100% pure dedication. That's not a habit you break in a day or a week or a month or even a year.
Right.
You know, it took a long time for me to get out of that mindset, and I had to practice doing nothing and relaxing and just doing it on purpose, you know, and kept telling myself, I'm not on a clock. Nobody's watching me. I've got no stats to get before Thursday at 2. And you mentioned, people watching you, there's this idea that you're being watched all the time, sort of thing. Another phenomena of that, can be oversharing.
Yes.
You get out of one of these situations where you have no secrets in your life, and then you're out in the real world, and suddenly you're like, a chatterbox telling people all about yourself, and they're like, whoa, dude, I really didn't need to know all that, because you're not used to having anything resembling personal space.
Right. Well, you're not allowed to have any privacy. And you're also supposed to, I'm thinking about one particular group I know, a Bible-based group, where people have to sit down for what's called a sin study. And you talk to the person who is your discipler, who sits with you and has you review everything that could have possibly been seen as a sin in your life. Not only the things that you've done, but the things you've thought. And then if there's not enough on the list, they'll find a way to manufacture more things on the list. Is it something that you ever saw happen, what that tainted you in some way, whatever. They just need a lot of things on the list so that you can look at that list and say, oh, I am a sinful person. I am a sinner. I do need this group to help cleanse me, to help keep me safe, to help keep me in line with God, and to help so that I can, go to heaven. And people within that group talk about leaving it and not knowing how much to share, how much not to share, how to have a relationship, because everything was sinful. Any kind of sexual urge was sinful. Everything was sinful. So they don't know what's normal, and they don't know what the social norms are, and they also don't know how much they're supposed to say about themselves and at what point. And also, if it turns out that they were withholding information, is there going to be some punishment for that, because there was in the cult?
Right.
Right. You know, I think the other thing is that information is often used as power within these groups. The followers are the ones who share all their information. The leader shares nothing.
Oh, absolutely. You don't even know in Scientology how trained or how audited, you know, what level are these leaders at. It's like best kept secret. Like, you can't know that. None of your business, you know, and you're like,
Right.
There was a period of time where the big question was even not who was David Miscavige? Did he exist? But what about all the people below him? Who are they? What are their names? What do they do? You didn't know any of that stuff. You know,
right.
Totally inaccessible. Nobody knew.
Yeah. I mean, not knowing how much to share and with whom to share it, and if you should share it, and if it's even healthy or safe to share it, it's just one of the many kind of issues that people grapple with when they leave a cult, especially if they were born and raised in it, because they don't know about social norms, and they have to. It's like they're learning it from scratch, or they're relearning it after many years. It's very hard.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.